Okay, so FPV drones. I keep seeing all these amazing videos and I just thought, it, let's just give it a go while I've still got some reaction time left. It's something I definitely think you guys should check out, especially if you're into adventure filmmaking. FPV drone footage going to take your adventure videos to another level, so definitely worth checking out. So in this video I'm going to show you my journey from being totally clueless to my first flight. I'm going to show you what gear you need, some really useful resources, and basically anything you need to start flying. So I've done the research, and I've done a lot of research so that you don't have to. I split the tutorial into two parts just to make it a little bit more digestible. So once you've finished part one, then obviously head on over to part two. Now I do suggest you follow the videos from start to finish and you spend time on each part before moving to the next bit of the video. So let's jump in and I'll show you my FPV journey so far. So first things first, I went on a ton of Facebook groups and met some really awesome people that really kindly shared their FPV knowledge with me. Learning from people that have already made that journey really can't be underestimated, and there's some really friendly FPV groups out there, so definitely join a couple of those. So they guided me towards what tutorials to watch and how to get started. As with everything, this can be quite overwhelming, but the name Joshua Bardwell kept coming up time and time again. So Joshua Bardwell's kind of the king of FPV. There's a link to his channel in the description. I suggest you just have a look through the channel. There's so much to learn on his channel, so much good stuff. So one of the first things I found out is that FPV drone flying is hard, like really hard. The whole controlling of the drone, or quad as it's known in the FPV world, is totally different to your standard drone and takes a lot of practice. So rather than practicing with and definitely crashing your actual quad, I was introduced to the world of FPV simulators. There are 3 or 4 FPV simulators to choose from. If I had to choose one, I'd go with Velocidrone. There's a link to it in the description. So first off, get that installed on your PC or Mac. From what I've been told, Velocidrone is the closest to flying an actual quad. So that's the one that I recommend you download and practice on. So next off, you are going to make your first purchase, a radio transmitter. So this is how you're going to control your quad. So it's kind of important. There are tons of radios on the market, but at this point, we're going to make a choice that kind of narrows it down a little bit. So we're going to make the choice between analog and digital. So basically, all FPV used to be analog. So a lot of your seasoned FPV pilots will still use analog to fly their quads. This is due to the low latency and just basically because their systems are set up to fly analog. It's what they've always done. And when we talk about analog and digital, it's basically the systems that are used to transmit the signal from your quad to your goggles or your transmitter. We're going to talk about more about the goggles later on. I'm not going to get too technical about analog and digital systems, but basically analog systems are generally cheaper, lower latency, and you can fly longer distances with the analog systems. The digital system, however, is slightly more expensive. The latency is slightly higher and they tend to not fly quite so far. But the image quality transferred from your quad's camera to your goggles is way better than the analog systems. And the digital system is only going to improve, especially since DJI are at the forefront. So it's only going to get better. So I would say if you're starting out in FPV like I am, despite the additional cost, I think the digital system is probably the best way to go. The analog side of things, I'm not going to be covering here. So if you want to find out a little bit more about analog, hit up Joshua Bardwell's channel and he will very eloquently guide you through the world of analog FPV. And when you progress in FPV, if you want to switch to analog systems, then that's something you can definitely look at doing. I just think if you're starting out, the digital system is way more user-friendly. So this brings us back to the radio. If you do choose to go digital, the easiest option would be to buy a DJI FPV controller. These controllers are linked to the transmitter on the quad and to the goggles, so you don't need any third-party gear. It's all set up and pretty much ready to go-ish. However, for me, the DJI controller is a bit and I wanted something a bit more the part. With customizable switches, just basically something that looked a bit cooler. So I went with the TBS Mambo controller. I picked this up for about £120, so similar in US dollars. So basically you have two main connections in FPV. The connection between your goggles, talk about that later, and your quad, and your radio. With the DJI controller and goggles, both are covered by the DJI Air unit within the quad itself. However, if you use a third-party radio like I have, you need to establish a connection between the radio and the quad via a transmitter. This is done via an antenna link, most popular being Crossfire and Tracer. The TBS Mambo has a tracer fitted inside the actual radio itself. So you don't need to buy it separately. It's already installed inside the actual radio, which is part of the reason I got the TBS Mambo. I'm not going to go into every different radio. There's far too many to choose from. But I would recommend the TBS Mambo, the TBS Tango 2, which again I think has a built-in tracer, or the DJI controllers. So they would be the ones that I stick to at the moment, just because it's a much easier setup. Whichever radio you choose, you'll want to calibrate your sticks or check they're calibrated properly. I've attached a link in the description to a Joshua Bardwell video to explain the calibration setup on the TBS Mambo. But depending on which radio you choose, you'll need to find out how to calibrate yours. There's plenty of tutorials around, so just Google it or go into a forum, ask somebody, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help. So once you have the sticks on your radio calibrated, it's time to dive into the world of FPV drone simulators, and in our case, Velocidrone. First things first, you'll want to go to the control section and make sure that the sticks on your radio match up with the controls in Velocidrone. It's really easy to do, really easy to set up. Now you can set up your sticks and fly the quad however you want to, but most people in FPV choose mode 2 to fly their drones or quads. So in mode 2, throttle is controlled by up and down on your left stick. Yaw is controlled by left and right on your left stick. Pitch is controlled by up and down on your right stick. And roll is controlled by left and right on your right stick. Okay, so they're the four main movements of the quad. And what you can do on Velocidrone is you can move the sticks and you can see how the drone moves on the actual screen. So that's quite a handy thing to have. Now there are other parameters that you can change, but I would suggest leaving everything else as is to start off with until you know a bit more about these parameters and what they do. As a beginner, I would just leave everything else as it is for now. Now once you start and take off, you immediately want to give up because it's impossible. I even had to ask in a forum if it was supposed to be this hard because I just could not believe how hard it was. It is just hard. You have to train your brain and muscle memory to fly an FPV quad, and it is quite a difficult thing to do. So you just have to persevere, and it does take time, a lot of time. It takes most people around 20 hours of sim time before they're even close to being able to go out and fly a real quad. So just understand that is the process, enjoy the process, and just keep going. Remember that anything worth doing takes time and practice. So just recognise that's all part of it. Now, some people might advise you to change the mode from acro, which is what most people fly real FPV quads with, to angle, which makes it slightly easier. But for me, I just thought, I'm just going to persevere in acro mode until I get that. I don't want it easier at the start. I'd rather just crack on with that and get there in the end. So you've got your radio, you've done your 20 plus hours in Velocidrone. Now it's time to make your next purchases, your quad and your goggles. Now the goggles are fairly easy. As we've gone digital, there's only one real option, and that's the DJI FPV goggles version 2. So you can pick these up for about 350 to 450 quid in the UK, probably similar in the US. So go and get yourself a pair of those. Okay, so that's it for part 1. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Head on over to part 2 where I'll guide you through the rest of the processes.